If you've done much woodworking, you know that just about every board you buy, no matter where you buy it, is not going to be perfectly straight, perfectly flat, perfectly true. And so you're going to have to do something to flatten it or straighten it or get the twist out or uncup it, etc. And so I've made a couple of jigs to help you do that, and I'll show you how to make them. So this is one example of the jig I'm talking about. It's got a super straight edge to it that rides up against your fence of your table saw. It's got some support underneath for the board to sit on. It's got some hold down clamps. I'd probably put more on, but I couldn't find that many. They're kind of tough to find. Actually, these ones were easy to find. I got all excited and I ordered these and was excited and started making the jigs. And then when these came in, I realized that the problem is when you clamp it down, the handle hangs over, and so I couldn't ride this against the fence because this was going to hit the fence. So I had to buy new ones. So I've come up with these. They're called vertical toggle clamps. And I got these ones at Princess Auto, but they only had 4 in stock. And I bought some other ones. I got these at Home Hardware. I'm in Southern Ontario, by the way. And I got these ones at Home Hardware, but they're quite a bit smaller, a lot less expensive. These ones were $11, I believe. These ones were $17. I would buy a bunch of those if I could afford to buy enough, because I'm going to have to buy a bunch because I've got 4 of these jigs. I'll explain in a moment why I need several of these jigs, but for now I'm just cutting a 4x8 sheet of plywood down to length, so I figured 5 feet is about the length I want these jigs to be. I may have to make other ones, longer ones in the future, but for now I'm going to make a bunch of 5-footers, so I'm just cutting a 4x8 sheet of plywood down at the 5-foot length so I can use the 5 feet. So here's a good example of why you need multiple. This jig is only 4 or 5 inches, whatever it is, wide. I'm trying to cut an 8-inch board. There's way too much hanging over the edge of the jig, and so it's going to be super dangerous. If your jig is very close to the width of your board, then you're going to be in much better shape. So I've made several. This one here is, I think, 3 inches. This one's going to be 5 inches. The next one is, say, 7.5, 8 inches maybe. And the final one, I think, is about 10.5 inches. So I can accommodate all size boards, or at least, I can be close. So here I'm just cutting down that 5-foot piece of plywood into several strips. I made my upper strips 2 and 3 inches. I should have made them wider, because then you could put horizontal hold down clamps on them. The horizontal ones have that arm that sticks out horizontally, and it won't let you ride against the fence unless you have a good wide board on the top that'll accommodate the entire length of that arm. So I didn't think about that, because I started doing this before they arrived, and I didn't realize. One thing that's very important is that you need to, when you glue this on, you need to have the small strip, the thin strip, overhang the edge of the wide strip, just by a touch, just by a little bit. As long as it's overhanging a little bit, then you're in good shape. If you don't overhang it, then your jig may not be perfectly square when you're finished it. But you're going to slice that off anyways. All right. So the first thing you do once you get it glued up is to run it through the table saw with the double thick side against the fence. And if that side is perfectly straight, which it should be if you've got if you've cut it properly, then you are creating a perfectly straight and parallel edge on the other side. The next thing you do is you spin it around, and now you run the side that you just cut off against the fence and trim the double thick side, and now you have a perfectly parallel, perfectly straight jig, and you just have to put some hold down clamps on it. And so that's going to be the next project, is to put the hold down clamps on. So you just want to put the hold down clamps close to the edge of the upper board so that they reach out over the board you're trying to hold down, and they hold it down more firmly. And they really hold them down firmly. When I put that board through the table saw to straighten it, it wasn't moving anywhere. So there's nothing, you don't have to measure these out or be specific with them. Again, if you made that upper board quite a bit wider, you could use horizontal clamps, which are much cheaper, or at least quite a bit cheaper, and they're easier to find as well. So I wish I had done that. But anyways, you can adjust the widths of your board to your own purposes. But once you get the hold down clamps on, you're done. I think I'd like to probably have more than 3, but like I said earlier, I just couldn't find them. They're tough to find. I could have got them on Amazon, but they were a little bit more expensive. So once the jig is done, you can just put a board in it. Now, I'm actually cutting off a little bit of the jig itself in this because the jig was a little bit wider than the board, but my next jig down wasn't wide enough. So I decided to adjust the width of this jig just by a touch, and so I ran it through and cut off the edge of the jig while I straightened the board. And that board turned out to be perfectly straight. It worked fantastic. Here's something interesting. I didn't even think about this, but these things almost nest together. I was a little bit worried about where I was going to store these 4 things, all right? They're 5 feet long and different widths, and if I had to store them individually, it would have been a bit of a pain, but they almost nest together. And if I had have made the top one there a little bit thinner, it would have nested nicely down. The hold down clamps would have been out of each other's way, and so it wouldn't be that much of a pain to store. All right, so it's not a bad little project if you need to straighten wood, which every woodworker is going to need to do at some point. All right, hope you got something out of this video, and come on back for the next one. Thanks.